Have you ever given something up, thinking it was just a small gesture, only to realize it changed your life forever? Imagine being a young black boy on a crowded flight, clutching a ticket to first class, a rare gift, a seat of comfort and pride. And then, an elderly lady struggling with her steps appears. Do you keep your seat, or do you rise and offer it to her? That's exactly what Malik Henderson did. Just a quiet choice, a moment of respect. But 5 minutes later, the woman slipped him a folded note. And inside that note was not just ink on paper. It was a secret tied to his father, a truth that would shake the very ground beneath him. What if that moment happened to you? Would you give up your place? Would you believe a stranger's words could alter the path of your entire life? This isn't just a story about kindness. It's about belonging, legacy, and the power of a choice. Stay with us, because what happened next will leave you questioning what you would do if it were you. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the rest of the journey. The departure hall at JFK International Airport was a restless river of people. Screens flashed with boarding times, rolling suitcases rattled across polished floors, and overhead announcements kept reminding passengers of gates and delays. Amid the rush, Malik Henderson sat quietly near Gate 47, a black leather carry-on by his feet and a book open in his hands. At 44, Malik carried himself with a calm that made him appear older, but there was also a trace of boyish wonder still alive in his eyes. He was the CEO of Phoenix Systems, a billion-dollar tech company known for its bold solutions. Yet here in the airport, in jeans and a simple blazer, he looked like any other traveler. He preferred it that way. Anonymity gave him peace. The boarding agent's voice broke through the noise. "Mr. Henderson, please approach the desk." Malik rose. Curious, the young attendant smiled politely and slid a new ticket across the counter. "You've been upgraded to first class today, sir. Complimentary." For a second, Malik hesitated. Upgrade still surprised him, even after years of success. Growing up, his mother had to count coins at the grocery store. His father, Jerome Henderson, had worn an army uniform and died in a desert far away before Malik turned 10. The idea of luxury had always felt fragile, something he could hold, yet never fully trust. He thanked the agent softly, slipped the new boarding pass into his pocket, and moved toward the first-class line. Eyes followed him, though. A couple in business suits glanced at his skin, then at his sneakers, whispering. A man in a navy blazer leaned toward his wife Strange. "Doesn't look the type." Malik caught the words but pretended not to hear. He had trained himself to. Success hadn't erased the sting of assumptions, it had only taught him to breathe through them. The cabin door opened. Warm light spilled across plush leather seats. Malik placed his bag overhead and slid into 2A. The seat was wide, the kind of comfort his younger self could never have imagined. But comfort is complicated. As he leaned back, memories flooded. He thought of being 12, waiting outside a bank with his mother, listening as the manager spoke down to her, refusing a loan she had begged for. He thought of college interviews where his name drew raised eyebrows. He thought of boardrooms where his ideas were doubted until someone else repeated them. Even here, in a seat worth more than a week's rent back in his old neighborhood, he felt those ghosts. Then he noticed her. At the edge of the boarding line, an elderly woman struggled with her suitcase. White hair, frail frame, trembling hands. The line behind her grew impatient. A man sighed loudly. Another muttered, "Come on, lady." But no one stepped forward. She shuffled slowly, trying to balance herself, one hand clutching her boarding pass like a lifeline. Malik felt something stir inside him. He watched as she finally reached the cabin, breathless. Her eyes darted to the first-class row, then to her ticket again, confusion clouding her face. The flight attendant smiled politely but not warmly, pointing her toward the crowded economy section. Malik's chest tightened. He remembered his mother again. Patricia, her tired shoulders after teaching all day, still carrying groceries up the apartment stairs alone. He remembered the time strangers walked past her as if she were invisible. And suddenly, his decision felt simple. He rose from his seat, approached the attendant, and said quietly, "Excuse me, I'd like to give my seat to the lady." The attendant blinked. "Sir, are you sure this is first class?" "I know," Malik said with a faint smile. "That's why she should have it." Gas rippled through the cabin. A businessman raised his brow, clearly irritated. A woman 2 seats over muttered, "Why would anyone give up?" First-class Malik didn't answer them. He gently guided the elderly woman forward. "Ma'am, please," he said softly. "Take my seat." Her eyes widened, shining with unshed tears. "Oh, I couldn't possibly." "You can," he interrupted gently. "It's yours now." Her frail hands trembled as she lowered herself into 2A. For a moment, she looked at Malik as though searching his soul. Then, with surprising firmness, she reached into her purse, pulled out a folded slip of paper, and pressed it into his palm. She whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "We've met before." Malik froze. His fingers tightened around the note. He wanted to ask what she meant, but the line behind him urged him to move. The attendant motioned for him to head toward economy. He glanced back once at the woman now seated in comfort, at the note burning in his hand, then walked down the aisle, heart suddenly restless. He had no idea that within minutes, that small folded paper would change everything he thought he knew about his life. The hum of the aircraft settled as passengers buckled in. Malik slid into his cramped economy seat, row 28 where the air felt heavier and the aisle pressed closer. His knees touched the seat ahead. He shifted, trying to fold his long legs into the narrow space, but the discomfort only deepened his thoughts. The note still rested in his palm, edges creased from her hurried fold. He had not opened it. Somehow, the weight of those 3 words, "We've met before," felt larger than the entire cabin around him. The engines roared, and the plane lifted, pressing everyone back against their seats. Malik stared out the small oval window as the skyline of New York blurred into clouds. Yet his mind wasn't on the city falling away. It was on the frail figure now sitting in the seat he had surrendered. Sipping water from a glass the attendants had carefully set before her, he replayed her face, the softness of her eyes, the quiver in her voice, the unmistakable gratitude, but also something else, an intensity, as though she had recognized him from a story only she could recall. The man beside Malik cleared his throat. He was middle-aged, with a rumpled shirt and earbuds dangling around his neck. "You gave up your seat?" he asked, not unkindly, but with a disbelief that bordered on curiosity. Malik nodded once. "She needed it more than I did." The man chuckled. "I don't think I could have done that. First class on a cross-country flight. That's gold." Malik smiled faintly, but said nothing. What was gold compared to dignity? He had learned long ago that true wealth lay in the choices no one else understood. Hours passed. The cabin darkened. Passengers slept, their heads bobbing against seat backs, while the quiet rumble of engines carried them westward. Malik turned the folded note over and over, debating whether to open it now. His heart told him to wait, though he couldn't explain why. When the plane touched down in Seattle, he was among the last to deboard. He stepped into the terminal, stretching his stiff limbs, scanning for baggage claim. That was when he saw her again. Clara Whitman stood near the exit, holding a modest leather purse. Her white hair caught the fluorescent light, and her posture was straighter than before, as though the short hours in comfort had renewed her strength. She was waiting for him. Their eyes met, and she smiled. Not the polite smile of strangers, but the knowing smile of someone carrying a secret too long. "Mr. Henderson," she said softly when he approached. Her voice had the weight of age, yet carried a steady firmness. "I owe you more than thanks." "You don't owe me anything," Malik replied gently. "Yes, I do." She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with tape that had long since lost its stick. She pressed it into his hand with surprising urgency. "This belongs to you." Malik hesitated, the envelope warm against his palm. "What is this?" Clara's gaze deepened. "A piece of your past. A promise I made a long time ago. I couldn't deliver it then, but I can now." The sounds of the airport swirled around them, announcements, luggage wheels, chatter, but they stood suspended in a quiet bubble, two souls tethered by something invisible. Malik wanted to ask questions, dozens of them, but Clara raised a hand gently, as if to pause his racing thoughts. "Will you sit with me for a few minutes? There's a cafe just over there." They found a corner table in the small airport cafe, far from the crowd. Malik ordered black coffee. Clara requested chamomile tea. She folded her trembling hands together and began to speak. "You probably don't remember me. How could you? You were just a child when our paths crossed." She paused, eyes glistening. "But I remember you. Or rather, I remember your father." Malik froze. The air between them seemed to shift, thick with unspoken history. "My father." His voice was low, almost reverent. "Yes," Clara whispered. "Jerome Henderson. He was a soldier. And I was there the night—" Her words caught. She steadied herself. "The night he died." The cafe sounds dimmed. Malik felt his heart beat in his ears. He leaned forward, his throat tight. Clara continued, her voice breaking but determined. "I was a military nurse in Iraq, 2003. Your father came in after an attack. Wounded badly. We did everything we could. He was so young, so brave. And in those final hours, he asked me for one thing." Her hand brushed the envelope. "He dictated a letter. For his son. For you." The world seemed to still. Malik stared at the envelope in his hand as though it were a relic. For years, he had lived with the absence of his father, with the silence that followed his death. He had imagined conversations that never happened, guidance never given, love unfinished. And now, here it was, words from beyond time, carried by a stranger who suddenly was no stranger at all. "I should have found you sooner," Clara said, guilt etched across her features. "Life kept moving. I retired. I got sick. I moved states. But I never forgot. I carried this letter with me all these years, waiting for the day I could give it to you. When you gave me your seat today, I knew it was time. I knew fate had placed us together again." Tears burned behind Malik's eyes. He swallowed hard, struggling for words. "All this time, you kept it?" "Yes." Her voice cracked, then steadied, because promises matter, especially promises made to a dying man. Malik's fingers trembled as he traced the envelope. He wanted to rip it open, to devour the words inside. But part of him was terrified of what those words might reveal, of reopening wounds he had spent decades stitching closed. Clara touched his hand gently. It won't take away the pain, but it may give you something you've been missing. A piece of him, a piece of yourself. He looked at her then, not just as an old woman he had helped on a plane, but as a bridge between his past and his future. And in that moment, he understood why he had given up his seat, why he had felt compelled without reason. It was never about comfort. It was about connection. Malik took a shaky breath. Thank you, Ms. Whitman, for keeping your promise, for finding me. Clara smiled, eyes wet. No, Mr. Henderson, thank you for giving me back my chance to finally keep it. Outside the cafe window, rain began to fall softly against the glass, as though the sky itself shared their grief and their grace. Malik held the envelope tighter, knowing his life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. The letter waited, and so did the truth. The ride from the airport cafe to his downtown hotel blurred in Malik's mind. Seattle's skyline stretched outside the cab window, rain streaking across the glass in fine silver threads, but he barely noticed. His hand never left the envelope. He held it as though it might dissolve if he let go, as though inside were not just paper and ink, but the missing heartbeat of his life. He set the envelope on the nightstand in his hotel room, pacing back and forth, staring at it from every angle. Each step he took seemed to echo with his father's name. The hotel air smelled faintly of detergent and fresh linen, but beneath it Malik felt the weight of sand, blood, and smoke the battlefield his father had never returned from. He sat finally, resting his elbows on his knees. He could open it. He could know. Yet his fingers stalled. What if the words inside were too painful? What if they confirmed the fear he had never voiced that his father had left the world disappointed, leaving a son he might not have believed in? Malik shut his eyes and inhaled, but his mind betrayed him, pulling him backward into memories he had kept locked away. He was 9 again, sitting on the porch of their small Bronx apartment. His father's boots echoed up the steps, scuffed and dusty from training. Jerome bent down, ruffled Malik's hair, and said, "Be good, son. Take care of your mama." His voice was steady, but Malik remembered the way his mother's hands trembled as she clutched her husband's arm. That was the last time Malik had seen him whole. Weeks later, a folded flag and 2 uniformed officers arrived at their door. Malik had not understood fully, but he had understood enough. His mother's sobs shook the walls. Malik had stood still, fists clenched, silent tears carving tracks down his cheeks. No words from anyone, not neighbors, not teachers, not the government had filled that silence. Now, decades later, the silence sat across from him in a sealed envelope. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his mother. "Patricia. Safe flight." He typed back quickly. "Yes, landed fine. Love you." He almost added, "I have something to tell you," but his thumb hovered, then deleted the words. Not yet. Not until he understood. Unable to sit still, Malik left the hotel and walked into the rain-slicked streets. Seattle at night shimmered with neon and wet pavement. He ducked into a small diner, the kind with cracked red booths and the smell of frying onions clinging to the air. He ordered coffee he didn't need and sat by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. The envelope lay on the table, unopened. He traced the edges absent-mindedly, as if feeling the heartbeat of his father pulsing through the paper. Memories returned, uninvited. High school. Malik, taller than most, sitting in the back of class while a teacher doubted his essay, claiming it must have been copied. College applications returned with polite rejections. The first job interview where the manager looked at his resume, then at his skin, and said, "We're looking for someone who can fit in with the team." Each moment had carved a groove in him, and each time he had thought, if Dad were here, he would tell me what to do. He would remind me who I am. But his father hadn't been there. Malik had built himself on the shaky scaffolding of guesswork and resilience, fighting to create dignity from the ashes of doubt. He turned the envelope over. Still sealed. The waitress approached, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and tired lines on her face. She nodded at the envelope. Love letter. Malik smiled faintly. Something like that. She topped off his coffee. "Open it," she said casually, like offering a slice of pie. You never know what words can do. Malik chuckled softly, thanking her, but his chest tightened. She was right. Words could wound. Words could heal. And sometimes, words could do both. He slipped the envelope back into his jacket and walked out into the drizzle. The city lights blurred into halos around his thoughts. His father's voice, imagined but vivid, echoed inside him. Be kind, even when the world isn't. Back in his room, Malik sat at the desk, letter poised before him. He opened his laptop instead, trying to distract himself with notes for the Future of Leadership Summit he was scheduled to speak at. The presentation slides glowed with bullet points about equity, innovation, data. Yet his eyes drifted back to the envelope, mocking him with its silence. The night stretched long. He placed the envelope under his pillow before finally lying down. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of desert winds, boots in sand, and a man's shadow reaching for him but never touching. At dawn, Malik rose with the envelope still unbroken in his hands. He looked at the Seattle skyline beyond his window. Somewhere inside him, he knew this day would change everything. The letter was not just his father's voice, it was a mirror. And once he opened it, he would have to face what he saw. The morning broke gray and misty, a typical Seattle dawn. Malik dressed in a crisp navy suit, the kind that usually made him feel shielded, armored for boardrooms and speeches. But today, the fabric seemed thinner, as if the weight of the envelope in his inside pocket seeped through the threads. He straightened his tie, took a steadying breath, and left the hotel. The conference was scheduled for the afternoon, which gave him a few hours. Clara had insisted they meet again before he went on stage. She had asked to see him not at the hotel or the Summit Hall, but at a small park near the waterfront. Something about the request felt deliberate, and Malik sensed that whatever she had yet to say belonged in open air, not behind glass walls. When he arrived, the park was quiet, except for gulls swooping low and the smell of salt from the Sound. Clara was already there, sitting on a bench beneath a maple tree whose leaves had begun to burn red with autumn. She looked more fragile than she had the day before, her cane leaning against the bench, but her eyes brightened as soon as she saw him. "You came," she said, her voice warm. "I wouldn't miss it," Malik replied. He sat beside her, pulling the envelope from his jacket. "I still haven't opened it." Clara nodded slowly. "I wondered if you had, but I'm glad you waited. Sometimes we need more than courage. We need readiness." Malik turned the envelope over in his hands. "I don't know what I'm afraid of more that it won't be what I need. Or that it will." Clara's gaze softened. "Your father's words won't fix everything. They won't erase what you've lived without him. But they can remind you of something the world has tried to make you forget, that you were loved fiercely, and that you were meant to belong." For a moment, the wind rustled through the maple branches, scattering a few leaves at their feet. Malik finally tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully. The ink faded but legible. The handwriting wasn't his father's. Malik realized it was Clara's, neat but hurried, the hand of someone writing under pressure. At the top, in block letters, she had written his father's name, Jerome Henderson. Malik read silently, his breath catching at every line. Andre. The letter began with the wrong name, then was scratched out. Malik, my son, if you are reading this, I couldn't come home. I need you to know a few things before I go. You are more than the color of your skin, more than the doubts they will throw at you. You belong wherever your feet stand. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Take care of your mother. Be kind even when the world is cruel. And build something better than what I leave behind. I may not be there to see it, but I will be proud. Malik's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the tears spilled anyway, landing on the page, smudging ink that had already carried years of distance. He pressed the paper to his chest, as though holding it close could collapse the gap between past and present. Clara laid a hand over his. He was brave in battle, and braver in how he spoke of you. He wanted you to grow in a world that saw your worth. He asked me to promise him that you'd know his heart, and now, finally, you do. Malik's shoulders shook. He hadn't cried like this since his father's funeral, when he'd stood too still, too young to understand how to mourn. Now, as a man, the grief poured out of him in waves. When the storm inside him eased, Malik folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. His hands were steadier now, as though anchoring themselves to something solid. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Clara smiled gently. "I only kept a promise. The real thanks belongs to him, and to you for being the man he hoped you would be." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the gulls cry overhead, to the distant hum of the city waking up. Malik realized that for the first time in decades, the silence around his father's death wasn't empty. It was full with words, with love, with truth. Finally, Clara shifted, wincing slightly. "You have your conference soon, don't you?" "Yes," Malik said. "I was supposed to talk about numbers and innovation. But now I think I need to talk about something else." She tilted her head, curious. "I think I need to talk about this letter," he said. "About kindness. About what it means to give up a seat, or to keep a promise, or to believe someone belongs even when the world says otherwise." Clara's eyes glistened. "That's the speech they'll remember. That's the speech that matters." Malik rose, helping her to her feet. The city stretched out before them, alive and waiting. He felt lighter, not because the burden had disappeared, but because it had finally been named. As they parted ways, Clara returning slowly to her apartment with the help of a driver. Malik heading toward the glass towers of downtown, he touched the envelope in his pocket again. It no longer felt like silence. It felt like a compass. By the time he reached the conference hall, banners flapped in the breeze. Future of Leadership Summit. Executives and entrepreneurs filed in, polished shoes clicking on marble floors. Malik walked among them, but his steps carried a new gravity. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, not just another suit with a speech. He was a son who had finally heard his father's voice. And that voice would guide every word he spoke. Long before Malik ever saw the letter, its words had been written in a room far from home. Clara's memory of that night had never faded, no matter how many years had passed or how many times she had tried to bury it. She could still smell the antiseptic mingling with the smoke of burned metal, could still hear the cries of soldiers carried down the hall of that makeshift field hospital in Iraq. It was late, near midnight, when Jerome Henderson was brought in. Dust and blood covered his uniform, and the medics' voices cracked with urgency. Clara, steady though her hands trembled, had been at his side the moment they wheeled him in. Shrapnel, chest cavity. "He's losing blood fast," one medic shouted. Jerome's eyes fluttered open for a second, then closed again. Clara leaned close, calling his name, grounding him with the sound of another human voice. "Jerome, you're not alone. Stay with me." The team worked furiously, but Clara saw what they all saw. The damage was too deep, the bleeding too heavy. The doctor finally shook his head, muttering orders that meant comfort care, not recovery. Clara's throat ached, but she pushed her sorrow down. She had learned long ago that a nurse's job was not only to heal bodies, but to carry souls through their last passage with dignity. Jerome must have known. His eyes opened again, sharp for a moment, as if he had gathered every last ounce of strength to speak. His voice was faint but urgent. "Please, someone write this down." Clara grabbed her notepad and pen. She nodded, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes, but her hands steady. "Go on." "I'll write." He swallowed hard, each breath ragged. "My son. His name is Malik. He's just a boy. Tell him he belongs. No matter what they say, he belongs." Clara scribbled furiously, every word etched into her heart as much as on the paper. Jerome coughed, pain twisting his face, but he pressed on. "Tell him to take care of his mama. She'll need him strong. Tell him to be kind, even when the world isn't, especially then." Clara nodded, her tears spilling freely now. "I'll tell him. I promise." Jerome's eyes softened, as if he could see through time itself. "Tell him I love him, that I'm proud. Even if I can't be there to see who he becomes, he's already more than enough." His voice cracked, his chest heaved, and Clara leaned close, clutching his hand. "I've written every word. He will know. I swear it." A faint smile flickered across his lips, fragile but real. With one final breath, Jerome Henderson let go. Clara had stood frozen for a moment, the pen still in her hand, the paper damp with tears. She wanted to scream, to rage at the injustice of it, that a father's love should have to travel by proxy, that a boy would grow up never hearing these words from his own lips. But instead, she folded the note carefully, tucking it into her uniform pocket. A promise had been made. The years that followed blurred into deployments, relocations, and finally, retirement. Clara had moved back to the States, always keeping that envelope close. She thought often of Malik, the boy she had never met but carried with her like an invisible companion. Life had its way of distracting her illness, loss, the slow march of age, but never once did she forget the letter. Now, as she sat across from Malik in Seattle years later, she shared the memory with him in detail. Her voice shook at moments, but her recollection was clear, as though it had all happened yesterday. Malik listened in silence, the words cutting through him like a blade, and at the same time binding wounds he hadn't realized were still open. He could see it all in his mind's eye, his father lying on that cot, struggling for breath yet still thinking of his son. Malik pressed the folded letter to his chest, as if by doing so he could bridge the years between them. "I didn't know," Malik whispered, his voice raw. "I never knew how much he wanted me to hear those words." Clara reached across the table, her frail hand covering his. "He wanted you to carry them for a lifetime." and now you can." Malik closed his eyes, letting the weight of it all settle. For so long, he had carried a quiet ache, an emptiness that even success and wealth could not fill. He had wondered, in dark moments, if his father had thought of him at all in those final moments. Now he knew. Jerome had not only thought of him, he had spoken directly to him, through the steady hand of a nurse who had kept her promise across 2 decades. When Malik finally looked up, his eyes burned, but his expression was steadier. "You gave me back my father." Clara shook her head gently. "He never left you." His words only had to find their way home. Malik exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. He realized then that this moment, the simple act of giving up a seat, the unexpected connection with an elderly woman, was no accident. It was the unfolding of something larger, a story written long before he ever boarded that plane. He folded the letter again, slipping it into the breast pocket of his suit, close to his heart. For the first time, he felt not just the burden of his father's absence, but the presence of his father's faith in him. That faith would guide him into the conference, into the choices he made, into the legacy he would build, not only as a CEO, but as a son who now carried a charge to be kind, to build, to belong. The ballroom of the Grand Summit Hotel gleamed with chandeliers, polished marble, and the quiet hum of conversations between executives. Outside the tall glass windows, Seattle's skyline glittered under a sky just beginning to clear after the morning rain. Malik stood near the stage, waiting for his session at the Future of Leadership Summit. His notes sat in his leather folder, neat bullet points about innovation, equity, and data-driven growth. But the folder felt strangely irrelevant now. The envelope, folded and worn, was tucked against his chest inside his suit jacket. Since Clara had handed it to him, Malik had carried it like a heartbeat. He had read it once in the park, yet every word demanded to be read again and again. Minutes before his name was to be announced, Malik stepped into a quiet corner backstage. He drew the letter out once more, unfolding it slowly as though the paper itself were sacred. The words seemed to shimmer, written in Clara's careful hand, but carrying his father's voice across 2 decades. "Malik, my son, if you are reading this, I could not come home. You are more than the color of your skin, more than the doubts they will throw at you. You belong wherever your feet stand. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Take care of your mama. Be kind even when the world isn't, especially then, and build something better than what I leave behind. I may not be there to see it, but I will be proud." Malik's throat tightened and his eyes blurred. He mouthed the words under his breath, as if repeating them could anchor him. A memory surfaced, vivid and sharp. He was 12, walking down the street with his mother after church. A white neighbor had crossed the street. Clutching her purse tighter at the sight of them, Malik had whispered, "Mama, why do they look at us like that?" His mother had squeezed his hand, but said nothing. That silence had lingered for years. And now, through the letter, his father had finally answered. The stage manager tapped his shoulder. "Mr. Henderson, you're up in 2. Malik folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into his jacket. He inhaled, steadying himself. This was not just another keynote. This was a chance to give his father's words a stage. When the announcer called his name, Malik walked onto the stage to polite applause. The room held over 500 leaders, CEOs, investors, policymakers, all dressed in their certainty, their world of polished data and quarterly reports. Malik placed his notes on the podium, glanced down at them once, then pushed them aside. He began not with numbers, but with a story. "This morning," he said, his voice low but steady, "I planned to speak about innovation, equity, and technology. But life gave me something else to share, something I believe matters more." The room quieted, phones stilled, eyes turned toward him. "On my flight here," Mullock continued, "I gave up my seat in first class for an elderly woman. It seemed a small act of kindness, but it was more than that, because 5 minutes later, she handed me this." He held up the envelope. His hands trembled slightly, but he did not hide it. Inside was a letter written almost 20 years ago. Words from my father, a soldier who never came home from Iraq. The audience leaned in. Silence deepened. Mullock unfolded the paper slowly, smoothing its creases. His voice cracked as he read aloud. "Malik, my son, if you are reading this, I could not come home." He read each line carefully, letting the words hang in the air. The ballroom felt hushed, as if even the chandeliers leaned closer to listen. By the time he finished, his own cheeks were damp, and he noticed tears glistening in the eyes of strangers across the room. "My father didn't live to see who I became," Mullock said, his voice steadier now. "But through this letter, I learned something he wanted me to know all along, that I belong, that kindness is power, that even when the world doubts you, you can build something better than what you inherit." He paused, the envelope pressed against his chest. "We gather at summits like this to talk about leadership. But leadership is not just strategy. Leadership is the courage to choose kindness, to believe that dignity belongs to everyone, to act as though our smallest choices like giving up a seat can ripple out and change lives." The words flowed now, not rehearsed, but real, pulled from somewhere deeper than his notes could ever reach. He spoke of systemic inequities he had faced, of boardrooms where his ideas were dismissed until echoed by someone else, of times when success did not protect him from suspicion at airports or condescension at dinners. And yet, through it all, he had chosen to keep building, to keep believing in dignity. "My father's last words," Mullock said softly, "were not orders about battle, not regrets about war. They were a promise to his son that kindness matters, that belonging is not granted by others but claimed by standing tall. That's the legacy I want to lead with. That's the legacy I invite you to carry too." When he finished, the room remained silent for a breath, as though absorbing the weight of what had been spoken. Then, applause erupted slow at first, then swelling into a standing ovation. Mullock bowed his head briefly, humbled, before leaving the stage. Backstage, he sank into a chair, his chest heaving. He had not planned to bare his soul to strangers, but he realized he had not spoken only for himself. He had spoken for his father, for Clara, for every child who had ever been told they did not belong. Later that evening, as he walked back to his hotel through the drizzle, Mullock felt lighter. The letter no longer burned in his pocket. It glowed. It was no longer just his father's farewell. It had become his own beginning. The hotel room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the city outside. Mullock sat by the window, still dressed in his suit from the summit, tie loosened, jacket draped across the armchair. The applause from earlier still echoed in his ears, but now it mingled with silence and reflection. The letter lay open on the desk, its creases deepening from how often he had folded and unfolded it. He stared at the familiar handwriting, feeling both a warmth and a weight that he could not put down. He thought of his mother, Patricia, who had carried the burden of raising him alone after Jerome's death. She had been the one to remind him of his worth when teachers doubted his abilities, when employers questioned his authority, when classmates mocked his skin. Yet even she had never spoken so directly about belonging as his father's words did. Malik wondered what it had cost Jerome to write them in the desert sands of Iraq, knowing he might never see his son again. The night pressed closer, and Malik poured himself a glass of water, hands trembling slightly. His success, his company, his wealth, his recognition suddenly felt both monumental and fragile. Would his father have approved of how he had built Phoenix Systems, of how he had navigated boardrooms that doubted him, or competitors who underestimated him until they lost Malik had built an empire of data and innovation? But had he built the world his father envisioned, a world kinder than the one he left? He turned on his phone and scrolled through the flood of messages. His speech had gone viral, clips spreading across platforms with captions like CEO reads father's final words at summit and kindness is leadership. Diana Lee, the young journalist from the flight, had posted a short video clip. Her caption read, "This is why stories matter. One act of kindness, one note, one voice, and the room changed." It already had hundreds of thousands of views. Malik set the phone aside. Fame was never the goal. What mattered was whether those words carried forward, whether they shifted something beyond applause. Yet the attention pressed on him, bringing both opportunity and expectation. Sleep would not come. So Malik went downstairs to the quiet lounge. The city lights shimmered across the glass walls. There, unexpectedly, he found Clara Whitman waiting in a corner booth. She wore the same navy coat from the flight, her silver hair tied back neatly. A cup of tea steamed in front of her, untouched. "You look like you might need company," she said softly as he approached. "And truth be told, I wanted to see you again before I leave tomorrow." Malik sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clara reached into her purse and set another envelope on the table. "This one is from me," she said. "I didn't know if I should give it earlier, but after hearing you speak today, I think you're ready." Malik hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter in Clara's handwriting. "Dear Malik, you gave me more than a seat. You gave me the chance to fulfill a promise. I carried your father's words for years, hoping one day they would reach you. Watching you today, I saw not just a son honoring his father, but a leader ready to honor the world. Do not doubt yourself. Carry his voice, but also your own. We need both." Malik folded the note carefully, emotion tightening his chest. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I did," Claire replied, "because I've lived long enough to know how easily legacies get lost, and how powerful it is when they are carried forward." Her words sank into him, deeper than the applause, deeper than the viral headlines. Legacy was not just memory, it was responsibility. It was a call to action. As they parted that night, Malik promised himself he would not let the letter fade into a private comfort. He would let it shape the way he led, the way he built, the way he gave back. The next morning, Malik called his mother. Patricia's voice trembled as he described the letter, reading parts aloud. She wept quietly on the line. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. "And I am proud, too. Just don't forget to rest. Malik, even strong men need rest." He smiled faintly. "I'll try, Mama." In the days that followed, Malik noticed changes around him. Colleagues who once treated him with stiff formality now approached with sincerity, asking about kindness and leadership rather than quarterly goals. Emails poured in from young professionals, Black, Latino, Asian, white, who said his story gave them courage to belong in spaces that doubted them. Some shared their own letters, written by parents or mentors long gone. Malik read each one, humbled by the threads connecting them. Yet along with inspiration came criticism. A headline in a financial blog sneered sentimentality won't balance the books. A rival CEO dismissed his speech as emotional theatrics. Malik felt the old anger rise, the urge to prove, to fight, to silence doubt with numbers and wins. But then he touched the folded letter in his pocket. His father's words steadied him. Be kind, even when the world isn't, especially then. So Malik chose a different response. Instead of lashing out, he scheduled a meeting with his team. He spoke not just of profits and strategies, but of building a company culture where kindness was not weakness, but strength, where belonging was not optional, but essential, where leadership meant more than authority, it meant accountability to something greater. Some executives shifted uneasily. Others nodded slowly. Malik knew it would not be easy to turn a vision into reality, but he also knew it was possible, because legacy was not about certainty, it was about persistence. That night, as he looked once more at the skyline from his hotel window, Malik felt the weight of legacy pressing against him. Heavy, yes, but not unbearable. It was the kind of weight that anchored him, that reminded him who he was and whose son he would always be. The days after Malik's keynote had brought a whirlwind he hadn't anticipated. Social media was ablaze with reactions, some celebratory, others sharply critical. While many applauded his vulnerability and the powerful story of his father's letter, others questioned his leadership style, labeling his emphasis on kindness as naive or sentimental fluff. Articles appeared in business magazines, some lauding his moral courage, others subtly undermining him with phrases like soft leadership or emotional theatrics in the boardroom. Malik scrolled through the posts in his office, the city skyline stretching beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. He exhaled slowly, eyes lingering on the glint of the morning sun reflecting off the river. Every criticism stung in a different way. Numbers and strategy he could argue with, but the suggestion that kindness was a weakness cut deeper. Malik, his assistant, Sam Rivera, knocked lightly on the open door. Your next call is ready. Pressing questions from investors, and they want to talk about margins, acquisitions, and projections. Some are asking about your summit speech, too. Malik nodded, his gaze lingering on the letter on his desk. He picked it up, tracing the faded ink with his fingertips. Jerome's words felt like a shield and a compass all at once. Sam, schedule the calls, but let's start with the investors who are on the fence. I want them to understand that kindness isn't just moral, it's strategic. It's how we retain talent, innovate, and build trust with clients. Sam raised an eyebrow but nodded. Got it. Malik spent the next hour on calls that tested his composure. Some investors pressed with skepticism, implying that emotional leadership could compromise bottom lines. Malik responded with calm, citing research and examples from Phoenix Systems' recent projects, showing that teams motivated by respect and empathy produced higher engagement and lower turnover. What, by the end of the calls, a few skeptics softened, though others remained unconvinced. Afterward, Malik retreated to his office lounge, a small space lined with books on leadership, psychology, and military history. He poured himself a cup of tea and leaned back, reflecting. Criticism, he realized, was inevitable whenever someone challenged the status quo. The stakes were higher for him not just because of his position, but because of the narrative surrounding him as a black CEO in a predominantly white, corporate world. His father's words echoed again. Be kind even when the world isn't, especially then. The reminder anchored him. Malik understood that leading with compassion might attract pushback, but it was the only way to honor his father's legacy and the lessons from Clara Whitman. Later that evening, Clara called him. Her voice, though soft with age, carried a sharp clarity. I've been following the posts, she said. Some people are cruel, but don't let that shake you. You're doing what your father wanted. The world will always try to measure kindness with profit margins, but those who matter understand. Malik smiled, feeling a weight lift slightly. Thank you, Clara. Your support. It means more than you know. Remember, she continued, legacy isn't about applause or likes. It's about impact. Even one act can create ripples that last far beyond what we see. The next week, Malik returned to the Phoenix Systems headquarters, his office, a space he had long considered a sanctuary, now felt like a bridge between worlds, the polished modernity of corporate America and the human vulnerability he had embraced on that flight. His team awaited him, some curious, others cautious after the viral attention. I know some of you have seen the headlines, Malik began, voice calm but firm. There will be voices that question our approach. There will be people who say empathy is a liability. I want you to know this: we lead differently because we choose to. We succeed because we understand people, not just metrics. There was silence, then questions. How would this approach affect quarterly projections? How could kindness translate into tangible results? Malik welcomed each question, answering with examples of client retention, team engagement, and community impact. He emphasized that empathy was not weakness. It was data-driven strength, a principle embedded into Phoenix Systems culture. By the end of the session, heads nodded, some with skepticism still, but with a glimmer of understanding. Malik sensed the shift. The team began to see that vulnerability could coexist with vision, and that leadership could be both human and effective. That night, Malik returned to his hotel. The city was quiet under the cool Seattle sky, a soft drizzle misting the streets. He pulled out the letter from Clara again. This time, he didn't read it. He simply held it against his chest, feeling the connection to Jerome, to the past, and to the chain of influence now unfolding. He thought of the elderly woman on the plane, her trust in him to honor his father's words, and the unexpected responsibility he had accepted. Sleep came in fragmented waves, but his dreams were vivid. He walked through the halls of his childhood home with Patricia, past classrooms where he had felt invisible, into boardrooms filled with doubting faces. Everywhere he went, he carried the letter, and everywhere he went, it reminded him of what truly mattered. Even in dreams, the words guided him: kindness, belonging, responsibility. The following morning, Malik returned to the airport for a business trip. On the way, he noticed a young man struggling with his luggage, a scene all too familiar from his own life. Without thinking, Malik offered assistance, just as he had done for Claire on the flight weeks before. The young man's eyes widened, gratitude lighting his face, and Malik smiled quietly to himself. It was a small gesture, seemingly inconsequential, yet he felt the ripple begin once more. As Malik boarded the plane, he reflected on the lessons he had absorbed. Leadership was not a performance, it was a practice. It was in the small, unseen moments, in the choice to act with integrity even when no one watches. His father's letter, Clara's guidance, and the plane encounter had converged into a singular lesson. Influence was measured not just by power, but by compassion, courage, and consistency. 2 weeks after the summit, Malik began to notice something remarkable. His story had not just lived in the conference room or in viral clips, it had taken on a life of its own. He received emails from universities inviting him to speak, letters from soldiers' families who had also lost loved ones, and handwritten notes from students who said they now carried their parents' advice like a compass. The phrase, "You belong wherever your feet stand," began to circulate as a quiet mantra, printed on posters in classrooms, shared in corporate training sessions, even quoted in sermons across communities. Phoenix Systems headquarters buzzed with a different energy. A junior developer stopped Malik in the hallway one afternoon, her voice nervous but eyes determined. "Mr. Henderson, I just wanted to say, after hearing about your father's letter, I finally had the courage to apply for a leadership program here. I never thought I belonged, but now I think maybe I do." Malik placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You do, and I look forward to seeing where you go." Inside boardrooms. The ripple effect was quieter, but no less profound. Executives who once dismissed discussions of equity as distractions now began framing them as investments. Malik noticed subtle changes, fewer dismissive interruptions when women or people of color spoke, more intentional mentoring programs springing up without his prompting. The company's culture was shifting, not by mandate, but by momentum. Beyond Phoenix Systems, Malik's influence began shaping policy conversations. Diana Lee, the journalist who had captured his speech, published a feature article in a major magazine titled "The Leadership of Belonging." It chronicled Malik's journey from a boy doubted in classrooms to a CEO carrying his father's words into boardrooms. The article went viral, sparking debates about what leadership meant in the 21st century. Critics still pushed back, but the groundswell of support was undeniable. One evening, Malik attended a town hall in Seattle where local students and entrepreneurs gathered to discuss diversity in business. He hadn't planned to speak, but his questions circled about systemic barriers and self-doubt. A young black boy stood up. His voice shook as he asked, "What if people always tell you that you don't belong? How do you keep going?" The room fell silent, eyes turning to Malik. He rose slowly, walking toward the boy, kneeling so their eyes met. Malik said, "I know how that feels. I've been told the same. But let me tell you what my father told me. You belong wherever your feet stand. Every time someone tells you otherwise, remember that's their fear, not your truth. You keep going by standing tall, even when it's hard." The boy's eyes brightened, and Malik saw a reflection of his younger self, scared, searching, but capable of carrying a spark forward. That moment, more than any headline, convinced him that his father's words were no longer just a legacy. They were a movement. Back at his office, Malik met with his leadership team to discuss launching a new initiative, the Henderson Fellowship. It would fund young leaders from underrepresented communities, offering mentorship, scholarships, and opportunities to build companies rooted in equity. His vision was clear. We've proven that kindness drives growth. Now let's invest in the next generation to prove it again and again. The proposal passed unanimously. Word of the fellowship spread quickly, attracting applications from across the country. Malik made a point of reading many himself, struck by the resilience in their stories. A single mother studying engineering at night, a veteran starting a nonprofit for mental health, a high school senior coding apps to help his neighborhood access fresh food. Each reminded him that legacy was not about him alone, but about creating space for others to rise at home. Patricia watched the news reports with quiet pride. She often called to remind him not to lose himself in the noise. Your father would smile at the fellowship, she told him. He believed in lifting others. Don't forget to lift yourself too. Malik promised her he wouldn't, though he knew the balance was fragile. Clara, too, kept in touch. She sent him clippings of local articles where his story had inspired community programs. One note read, "Your father's words are reaching more people than either of us imagined. Keep carrying them, Malik. The world is listening." But Malik knew the ripple effect carried responsibility. With influence came scrutiny, and with momentum came pressure to sustain it. Yet rather than shrink from it, he leaned into it. He began carving out time each week to mentor employees, to meet with community leaders, to speak in spaces where voices often went unheard. Each act felt like another stone dropped into the water, each ripple expanding outward. One night, as he reviewed fellowship applications late into the evening, Malik paused to reflect. The boy who had once questioned whether he belonged now sat at the center of a movement he hadn't planned, but knew he was meant to lead. His father's letter rested in a frame on his desk, illuminated softly by the desk lamp. Malik traced the words with his eyes once more, whispering them under his breath. You belong wherever your feet stand. And now, he realized, it wasn't just about him. It was about every person who would one day carry those words forward, letting the ripples become waves. The conference room on the 41st floor was sharp with tension, its polished mahogany table stretching like a battlefield between old guard executives and Malik's leadership team. Outside, the skyline shimmered with late afternoon light, but inside the mood was stormy. Phoenix Systems had invited a coalition of partner companies to discuss the fellowship initiative and the cultural shift Malik had championed. He knew not everyone in the room was supportive. At the far end sat Charles Wentworth, CEO of an old-line manufacturing firm and one of Malik's most vocal critics. Wentworth had built his reputation on hard numbers, cost-cutting, and a no-nonsense approach that treated employees as replaceable units. His company held a substantial contract with Phoenix Systems, and his presence here was deliberate to challenge Malik openly. As the meeting began, Malik outlined the Henderson Fellowship and its broader mission. He spoke with calm clarity about lifting new voices, investing in underrepresented talent, and embedding kindness into corporate strategy. Most listened respectfully, though Malik caught subtle smirks and impatient glances from Wentworth's corner. Finally, Wentworth leaned forward, his voice thick with disdain. Mr. Henderson, I've read the headlines. I've seen the videos. Stirring speeches, emotional appeals, all very moving. But let's be clear. Sentiment doesn't pay dividends. This fellowship, this so-called culture of kindness, what guarantee do we have that it won't dilute focus, bleed resources, and weaken competitiveness? You've turned leadership into a therapy session. Is this what shareholders signed up for? The words landed heavy in the room. A few heads turned toward Malik, waiting for his response. The old sting of being doubted flickered in his chest, but he pressed his palm lightly against his jacket pocket where his father's letter always rested. Jerome's words steadied him. Be kind even when the world isn't, especially then. Malik rose slowly, walking around the table. His voice was quiet at first, but each word carried weight. Mr. Wentworth, I understand your concern. You've built your empire on efficiency and control. But let me tell you what I've learned. Efficiency without humanity is fragile. Control without trust is brittle. And leadership without kindness is hollow. Wentworth scoffed. Strong words. But where's the proof? Malik stopped at the center of the table. eyes sweeping across the room. The proof is in every employee who stays not because they have to, but because they believe they belong. The proof is in reduced turnover, in innovation born from diverse voices, in clients who trust us not just with contracts, but with their vision. The proof is in the fact that Phoenix Systems grew 15% last quarter while embedding empathy at our core. That is not sentiment. That is strategy. The room murmured. Even skeptics glanced at each other. Considering. Wentworth's jaw tightened. And what if you fail? What if this experiment collapses under its own weight? Malik met his eyes steadily. Then we will fail with dignity. But I would rather try to build a world my father believed in than succeed in a world that crushes people. Because failure with integrity is not loss, it's learning. And success without humanity is not victory, it's emptiness. A silence followed, heavy but charged. Some executives nodded subtly. Others looked away, unwilling to concede, but unable to dismiss the conviction in Malik's words. Then, unexpectedly, a voice spoke from the back. It was Diana Lee, who had been invited as a guest observer and chronicler of the fellowship. With respect, gentlemen, she said, I watched Malik give up his seat on a plane to an elderly woman. That act led to a letter from his late father, words that changed not just his life, but the lives of everyone who's heard them since. I've seen the ripple. What I witnessed was not weakness. It was strength, the kind of strength our world is starving for. The room shifted again. Malik looked at Diana, gratitude flickering in his eyes. He returned his gaze to Wentworth. You asked for proof. Here it is. Kindness doesn't dilute leadership. It multiplies it. And if you can't see that, maybe the question isn't about my leadership. Maybe it's about what kind of world you want to leave behind. The meeting ended with no dramatic declarations, but the undercurrent was clear. Some left skeptical, but many left thoughtful. And Malik knew that was enough. Change rarely came in thunderclaps. It came in ripples, persistent and undeniable. Later that night, Malik sat alone in his office, city lights painting streaks across the glass. He replayed the confrontation, the doubt in Wentworth's tone, the flicker of uncertainty in others' eyes. The weight of legacy pressed again, reminding him that leadership was not about pleasing everyone. It was about standing firm in the storm. His phone buzzed, a message from Clara. Just 3 words. Keep standing tall. Malik smiled faintly, feeling the letter's presence once more in his pocket. He whispered into the quiet room, as though speaking to both his father and himself. I belong, and I will keep building better. The weeks that followed the tense boardroom confrontation unfolded in unexpected ways. Malik had braced himself for resistance, for contracts to be pulled, for whispers questioning his leadership. Instead, the ripple of his message began to reach even the most unlikely corners. One morning, his assistant Sam Rivera entered his office with a cautious smile. You'll want to see this, he said, placing a neatly folded newspaper on Malik's desk. The headline caught his eye immediately. Wentworth Industries announces Diversity Mentorship Program. Malik blinked, scanning the article. It described how Charles Wentworth, the same man who had scoffed at him weeks earlier, had launched a pilot initiative pairing young employees with senior mentors, citing the evolving needs of leadership in a changing world. Malik leaned back in his chair, surprise mingling with quiet satisfaction. He knew Wentworth hadn't transformed overnight, and perhaps the move was motivated as much by public relations as conviction. But even so, it was a crack in the wall, a sign that persistence could soften resistance. Later that day, Malik received an unexpected call. Wentworth's voice came through the line, still gruff but lacking its earlier bite. "Henderson," he began awkwardly, "I figured you'd see the papers. Don't think I'm joining your parade just yet. But maybe there was more truth in your words than I wanted to admit." Malik smiled faintly. "Change doesn't require parades, Mr. Wentworth. It requires steps, one at a time." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "You're stubborn, Henderson. But perhaps that's what makes you dangerous, and maybe effective." When the call ended, Malik sat for a long time in silence, reflecting on how even adversaries could begin to bend. Redemption, he realized, wasn't always about grand confessions. It was about small acknowledgments that growth was possible. The fellowship initiative flourished. Applications poured in from across the country, stories of resilience and vision that left Malik humbled. The selection committee chose its first cohort 10 young leaders from diverse backgrounds. On the day of their induction, Malik stood before them, feeling the weight of responsibility and the flicker of hope. "You are not here because you were given a handout," he told them. "You are here because you carry potential that the world too often overlooks." My father's letter reminded me that belonging isn't given, it's claimed. I hope you claim it boldly, wherever your path leads. The room erupted in applause, and Malik saw in their eyes the spark of something larger than any single company. These young leaders were not just recipients, they were carriers of the ripple. Meanwhile, Diana Lee's feature article continued to spread, picked up by national outlets. Invitations poured in for Malik to speak at universities, military academies, and even Congress. Some he accepted, others he declined, careful not to let his message become diluted by overexposure. But each time he spoke, he carried the letter, sometimes reading from it, other times simply holding it as a silent anchor. One afternoon, Malik traveled to Arlington National Cemetery. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and rows of white stones stretched endlessly into the horizon. He found his father's grave, knelt, and placed a small frame containing the letter at its base. "I've carried your words, Dad," Malik whispered, "and they've carried me further than I imagined. You told me to build something better. I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying." The wind rustled the trees as though answering. Malik stood, shoulders squared, heart lighter. For the first time in years, he felt less like a man proving himself and more like a son continuing a story. Back at Phoenix Systems, Patricia visited her son at headquarters. She walked slowly through the gleaming halls, pausing to look at photos of employees and fellowship recipients displayed along the walls. Malik watched her eyes shine with pride. "You've built more than a company," she told him softly. "You've built a family. Your father would see that." That night, Malik received an email from Clara Whitman. She had returned home but followed his journey closely. Her words were simple, yet profound. "I kept your father's letter safe for years, but it was always meant for you. Now I see it was never just for you. It was for everyone your life would touch. Thank you for carrying it forward." Malik closed his laptop, sat back, and let the words settle. Legacy was no longer just a memory passed down. It was alive, unfolding in the present. As autumn turned to winter, Malik spoke at the graduation of the first Henderson Fellowship cohort. The hall was filled with families, mentors, and supporters. One by one, the fellows shared their visions, new nonprofits, startups, community projects. Each spoke with a confidence that reminded Malik of his own uncertain beginnings. When his turn came, Malik stepped up to the podium. He looked out at the audience, then down at the letter in his hand. My father's words traveled through time to find me. They reminded me that belonging is not granted, it is lived. Today, I see belonging in each of you. The fellowship is not the end of his letter. It is only the beginning of ours. The applause was thunderous, but Malik hardly heard it. His gaze was fixed on the fellows, on the sparks of possibility in their eyes. In them, he saw proof that the ripple had become a wave, and in that moment, he understood something his father had never written, but had always implied. Legacy is not just what you inherit, it is what you give away. Snow fell gently across the city, soft flakes drifting past the tall glass windows of Phoenix Systems headquarters. Malik stood in the lobby, watching employees gather coats and scarves, their laughter echoing as they prepared for the holiday break. The air carried warmth despite the chill outside, a warmth Malik felt deep in his bones. The Henderson Fellowship's first class had graduated just weeks earlier, and their projects were already making headlines: a mobile health clinic in rural Alabama, a mentorship program for girls in tech, a startup connecting veterans with mental health resources. Malik followed each update with pride, knowing these young leaders were carrying the torch further than he alone could. Yet the true measure of legacy wasn't in headlines or accolades. It was in the quiet moments, the small choices repeated day after day. Malik had come to understand that more clearly than ever. That evening, he hosted a small gathering at the company auditorium. Employees, fellows, and families filled the room, joined by Patricia and Clara, who had traveled despite the winter cold. The stage was simple: a podium, a screen, and, at its center, a glass case holding Jerome's letter. As the crowd settled, Malik stepped forward. He didn't carry notes this time. He carried only his father's words in his heart. "A year ago," he began, "I boarded a plane and gave up my seat to an elderly woman. I thought it was a small act of kindness. But 5 minutes later, that act changed everything. Because in return, I was given this letter, my father's last words." The audience leaned in, many already familiar with the story, yet eager to hear it again. Malik's voice softened. "He told me I belonged. He told me kindness was power. He told me to build something better. At first, I thought his words were just for me, but I've learned they are for all of us. Every act of kindness ripples outward. Every choice to stand tall creates space for others to rise. That is the legacy we share." He gestured toward the fellowship graduates seated in the front row. "You've proven this truth. You've turned one man's letter into many, and you will write letters of your own, not on paper, but in lives touched, communities changed, futures opened." A hush filled the room, broken only by Patricia's quiet weeping in the front row. Clara reached over to hold her hand, their shared pride uniting them in a way words could not. After the speech, Malik invited Clara to the stage. Though her steps were slow, her presence commanded respect. She stood beside the glass case, her hand trembling slightly as she rested it on the edge. "When I carried this letter all those years," she said, her voice quivering, "I wondered if it would ever reach the right hands. Tonight, I see it reached not just Malik's, but all of yours. Legacy is not about holding on, it's about passing forward. And tonight, I can let go, knowing it lives on." Tears shimmered in the eyes of those gathered. Malik stepped closer, wrapping an arm gently around Clara's shoulders. For the first time, he saw her not just as the woman on the plane, but as a guardian of his father's words, a bridge between past and future. Later that night, after the gathering dispersed. Malik walked Patricia and Clara to the car waiting outside. Snow crunched underfoot, the city lights glowing golden against the winter sky. Patricia hugged her son tightly. "You've done more than I ever dreamed," she whispered. "Your father's letter started it, but your choices carried it further." Clara smiled warmly. "He belongs." Patricia, just like Jerome said, and because he claimed it, so many others will too. Malik kissed his mother's forehead, helped Clara into the car, and watched as it pulled away. Then he stood in the falling snow, the silence wrapping around him like a blessing. The following morning, Malik returned to his office early. He brewed a cup of coffee, the steam curling upward as dawn broke over the city. He sat at his desk, the framed letter catching the first rays of sunlight. He read it once more, not out of need, but out of ritual, letting the words settle into him like prayer. Be kind even when the world isn't, especially then. He realized now that the letter had never been a command. It had been an invitation, one he had accepted, not just for himself, but for countless others. As the day began, employees trickled in, greeting one another warmly. Malik watched them, recognizing the quiet ways the culture had shifted, colleagues pausing to listen rather than interrupt, managers mentoring with patience, teams celebrating small wins together. The company had not just grown in profit, but in spirit. Malik opened his laptop to review a new proposal expanding the fellowship internationally. Fellows from the first class had already connected with peers abroad, eager to share the model. Malik smiled, sensing the ripple stretching across oceans. His phone buzzed. A message from Diana Lee appeared, drafting another piece. This time it's not about the letter. It's about what you've built since. The headline, "The legacy lives on." "Thought you'd approve." Malik chuckled softly, typing back. "Only if you remind them it's not just my legacy, it's ours." The day wore on with meetings, calls, and decisions, but through it all, Malik carried a steady peace. The battles were not over. Critics would still come. Challenges would still rise. But he had found his anchor, his compass, his belonging. That evening, as he left the office, Malik paused in the lobby. Employees were still gathered, chatting and laughing, the hum of community filling the space. He looked around and thought of his father's words again, not as a memory, but as a living truth. He stepped into the cold night, snowflakes landing on his shoulders, and for the first time in his life, Malik felt not just that he belonged, but that he had helped others feel the same. The legacy was alive, and it would continue, carried by every act of kindness, every voice that refused to be silenced, every step taken with courage. The story of Malik Henderson reminds us that sometimes the smallest choices reveal the greatest truths. A single act of kindness, giving up a seat, opened a door to healing, legacy, and a deeper understanding of belonging. For older audiences, this carries a timeless reminder: every decision, no matter how ordinary it may seem, carries weight. You never know how one moment of respect can ripple through families, communities, or even generations. Malik's journey shows us that dignity is not granted by status or wealth. It is affirmed by how we treat one another. His father's words, carried through a stranger's hands, remind us that legacy is built in the quiet strength of character, not in the noise of pride. In our own lives, we can take this to heart, whether it's offering a seat, lending a listening ear, or standing firm in what's right. These acts create hope, and hope, especially as we grow older, is something we pass down like a treasured letter meant to outlast us, meant to inspire. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your support means the world. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more powerful stories of dignity, justice, and hope to life. Stay with us, because the next story might be the one that speaks directly to your heart.